So Zelensky asked President Trump for a weapon that is so powerful it could force Russia to the negotiating table without Ukraine even using it. And apparently, Trump is actually considering making that move. I mean, let the speculation begin, right? I'm hearing a lot about tomahawks. Maybe. I mean, that would be significant. Ukraine could put those to good use. I don't know that even 100 plus tomahawks is enough to force Putin to the negotiating table, but either way, that's one of the many things that came out of an interview just released earlier today between Ukrainian President Zelensky and Axios reporter Barak Ravid. Now, in this interview, and we're going to play a couple clips from it and talk through this, Zelensky actually gets pretty emotional when he apologizes to his family for having to spend all of his time defending and fighting for Ukraine and not nearly enough with them. He talks about what changed between he and President Trump, how Vice President Vance isn't exactly his best friend, but they're far from enemies, and quite a bit more. Now, the full interview between Ravid and Zelensky will be linked in the description below if interested, but with that, let's get into it, starting with this very interesting statement about a very powerful weapon that Ukraine has asked for. Here we go.
What is the one big thing, tangible thing, real thing, not a post on social, the one thing that you need President Trump to give you in order for you to win on the battlefield?
I think President Trump knows. I said to him yesterday, what we need, one thing. I said already to him.
Which was?
I will not tell you which was it, but I will tell you that he said, we will work on it.
Was it a weapon system that you feel you need?
We need it. It doesn't, by the way, we need it, but it doesn't mean that we will use it. Because if we will have it, I think it's additional pressure on Putin to sit and speak. There is only one thing what President Trump really can give us using any kind of systems, but he can stop Putin. He can pressure him to sit and stop the war, go to diplomacy.
All right, so we're going to try to think inside the box here for a little bit because they specifically reference a weapon system. So the outside the box would be U.S. forces somewhere in the country or maybe a no-fly zone, right? But they're talking about an actual weapon system. My mind first, what is the one thing that could force a country to abandon all nuclear weapons, right? But that does not seem in the cards at all for a lot of different reasons. And it's hard to imagine that at this point Ukraine would be making that ask formally of the United States and that the United States would even be considering it. So we got to step back a little bit. Tomahawks come in, but again, that's, that would be significant. Yes, it would allow Ukraine to, but it's not even the weapon systems. Right now, it's about, Western approval to use some of these weapon systems to strike inside of Russia, something they're going to get to here in a minute. So I don't know. It can't be a system like the F-35 that it's going to take a long time to train people up. The way Zelensky's talking about this is like, if it shows up in Ukraine tomorrow, Putin is immediately going to be like, that's bad. Okay, situation has changed. We need to talk. So it can't be a system that's going to take a long time for new people to be trained on. Interested in your thoughts on this. Throw them in the comments below. What is the thing you think Zelensky asked for? Now, as mentioned, Ravid did ask about long-range strikes inside of Russia. That's been a topic of contention for quite a while now. There are weapon systems like the Storm Shadow and the ATACMS, and then the Storm Shadow equivalent, same system, but the Scalp cruise missile, same as the Storm Shadow, just from different countries, that can only be utilized at this point in Crimea, and I think that's it, to be honest. I think they could have used them in Kursk and did while Ukraine was in Kursk. Since then, maybe some of the territories right on the border, if they're actually launching attacks into Ukraine. But one big question is, and has Zelensky pushed for the use of more of these U.S. or Western-provided weapons to strike deeper inside of Russian territory? Here's what they had to say about that.
So you don't feel that today the U.S. is not giving you a green light to use U.S. weapons for long-range strikes inside Russia?
Be very honest. I think that if we will have such long-distance weapon from the United States, we will use it.
So we will
use it.
Against Moscow?
Look, it's not about, we are not terrorists. Even our people, for today, they hate Russians because they began the war and they killed us. But all our people understand that we don't need to attack civilians.
But
we know what does it mean, the rules of this war. So we will attack their military. But if they will do blackout for us, and if we will have long-distance weapon more strong weapon from the United States, we will attack their energy.
So there you have it. We will attack their energy. We've seen that continuously. I mean, overnight, another Russian oil refinery went up in flames, and there's just shocking numbers in terms of the effects that is having on the Russian economy right now. And it's slow and creeping, right? So it's not an overnight thing, but we're seeing more and more restrictions on oil consumption and exports in Russia. So Zelensky right there saying if we get the green light to launch attacks further inside of Russia, we're going after their oil. And it's notable because Ravid asked a question that I think is pretty standard when people assume that there's going to be strikes inside of Russia is Moscow, right? You're going to go after the Kremlin. That doesn't necessarily hold the same strategic advantage as going after some of their war-fighting abilities. And that's where President Zelensky, I think, wisely, and as this interview goes on, you'll see, I think he's getting very, very good at conducting these interviews and what to say and how to say it. He shifted it back. It's not Moscow. This is not, it doesn't do any good to throw a missile into the side of the Kremlin. Like a little bit of a PR effect, fine. Ukraine can do that. They can already fly drones and hit targets around Moscow. That's not really the goal. They have to do something to force an end to the war. Those are strategic targets. As President Zelensky mentioned, that is energy infrastructure inside of Russia. Now, I did have some criticisms of this interview because I feel like at a couple different points, and you got it in that last clip a little bit, Ravid, to me, was trying to kind of force Zelensky to say certain phrases and words. And one of those was around kind of threatening the Russian people that they would have to find bunkers. And we saw this with Medvedev, actually heard this quote, the clip that was taken yesterday and circulated on social media, kind of previewing this interview. And he took that and immediately went to a nuclear threat against Ukraine and the United States. But I'm going to play the clip here so you get an idea of how Ravid was really trying to get Zelensky to say this certain thing. He didn't really, but either way, for the full context, here it is.
So what would you tell somebody who works at the Kremlin today? Would you tell him to make sure he knows where the nearest bomb shelter is?
First of all, they have to know where their bomb shelters are. They need it. If they will not stop the war, they will need it in any case. And they have to know that we in Ukraine, each day we will answer. If they will attack us, we will answer them.
So not sure that's entirely like my warning to the Russian people is to know where the bomb shelters are, but either way, you can see how he's kind of pushing to try to get a nice soundbite out there. But before continuing on with this one, I wanted to give you guys an update on the fundraiser that we just kicked off yesterday. 24 hours in, $47,000 raised, because you all are incredible. It is always so inspiring to see the kindness and generosity flowing from the audience here and across other platforms. And wow. So this one's through Ukraine Aid Operations. It's a 501c3, so every donation is tax deductible, and we've got a one-for-one donor, anonymous donor match. So you put $1 in, he matches $1. 5, 50 cents gets matched with 50 cents. Now, we're trying to pick up some drones for a handful of different Ukrainian units fighting in the east, some of the hottest sectors of the front, specifically the defense of Kramatorsk. So we've got a couple videos already from guys out there fighting, asking for some help, providing these drones to assist using the drone wall that is stopping and causing so many casualties amongst the Russian invaders as they continue pushing into Ukrainian territory. If interested and able, the link to contribute is in my in the description below, as well as the pinned comment. We'll keep you up to date with this one. Again, thank you all so much for your continued generosity. Now, continuing on, President Zelensky, I think, had some really good lines here talking about why they fight. You know, Ravid was asking, hey, you're not taking back territory very fast. And President Zelensky said, it's not necessarily about the ground. There's more to it than that. Here you go.
But when it comes to getting the territory back, every expert I spoke to, including people in Ukraine, think that it is close to impossible to get all the territory back militarily.
Because you will have human losses. If you will use only such weapon what you have, you will have human losses. That's why it's a mistake, to lose so many people, because the land without people, what does it mean? No, it's not about territories. It's about Ukraine independence, our sovereignty, and of course, first of all, about our humanity, about our people. That's why we will not lose for the kilometers. We will not lose our population, of course.
So I think that was a pretty important series of comments there by President Zelensky, because, and Ravid dove into this in a couple different ways, saying like, it doesn't look like Ukraine is losing, but you're also not winning. And Zelensky said that. He goes, yeah, we're not winning. And then he kind of moved into these statements here, how it's about the sovereignty of the nation. It's about the survival of the nation. It doesn't do any good to just sacrifice bodies for a square meter of territory in the east, that you don't accomplish your goals doing it. I think it's also a bit of a contrast with how Russia is fighting this war. And we're seeing bodies, in a sense. I mean, there's a long list from Russian soldiers on social media that was captured the other day, showing just what they're ranting about at the front. And that's one of the things, is they feel like they're just being pushed forward to die, and to die for what? There has been plenty of criticism in Ukraine about the appropriate use of soldiers and units at different times throughout this fight. The summer offensive of 2023 is a big one, probably the most notable one. Was that the most effective use of the Ukrainian military resources that they had at the time? I think the answer is probably no, unfortunately. And you can hear Zelensky in these statements talking about how we have to be really careful and do this the right way, because the end goal, again, is not a stretch of territory in the east. It's the future sovereignty of their nation. Now, I want to play this one before getting too far along, where President Zelensky has asked us, Yom Kippur is coming up here in a couple days. Ravid mentions that, says it's a time of reflection. Is there anybody that you would like to apologize to? Which, who knows if these questions are screened ahead of time. It feels like that's one I would want to know, because it's a little bit out of left field. But listen to the answer here, and I think this is one of the first times I've seen President Zelensky, at least in an interview with the West like this in English, get pretty emotional in his response. Here we go.
Is there anything or anybody that you would wish to apologize on this day?
My mother. My mother, my father, because I'm deeply in my job. Sometimes I don't have time just to speak with them and just to hug, just to comment, to be thankful for that they gave me everything what I have. That's brain education, and I think the family warmth, and I'm very apologizing. And my wife and my children, again, because I all my time is with my today's job. But I think that they understand that for each man, I think, in the world, the priority is his family. His family, his country. Because family, it's a part of your world. And your world is your country. Yes. And for me, because of this profession, the priority is Ukraine. And it's a pity that I have to recognize this is the priority, to finish this war. And only then, time for my family. I'm apologizing, but this is what am I?
So, yeah, pretty powerful, to say the least there. Now, shifting back to some of the relations here between the United States and Ukraine, he was asked what is on everyone's mind, and this was addressed on Fox News a couple nights ago, where they said, a couple months ago, President Trump said, you don't have the cards, that, blow-up meeting in the Oval Office. So Ravid asks, that was not that long ago. What changed? And to Zelensky, he thinks, look, it's probably, yes, Zelensky has definitely gone about trying to win over President Trump and the United States. He's also like, hey, look, Putin keeps lying. And I think Trump and the people of the United States figure that out pretty quickly. Here we go.
Not very long ago, said that, Mr. Zelensky, you don't have the cards.
Yeah.
So what changed?
What changed? I think the situation with Putin, his relationship with Putin. And I think that President Trump understood that Putin will not bring him success. Even if we will look at this moment like the society, American society, I think, which is very important for President of the United States, the support of society. And for any kind of leader, it's very important. And I think that society really... American society doesn't respect and doesn't trust Putin. And mostly they doesn't trust that he wants to finish this war.
So there's an interesting aspect here where when you look at how President Trump has kind of navigated this conflict so far, it doesn't really line up with general U.S. sentiment. So when you talk about things like providing weaponry to Ukraine, it tends to be a closer split. Still over 50% of Americans consistently have wanted to provide weapons to Ukraine. And that's, of course, one of the big questions. But when you get into things like, do you side more with Russia or Ukraine, it's overwhelmingly against Russia, right? You always have just a fraction of the American public, like within the margin of error type stuff, single digits. So a lot more people just ask that at baseline align with Ukraine than Russia. When you get into things like, should we put U.S. boots on the ground, that's a wildly different question. And there is not support in the United States for that. But the support, American people have, since this war began, been more on the side of Ukraine than Russia, and it has not been close. And when you saw President Trump trying to kind of win over Putin, especially during the Alaska summit, the response from the public, poll after poll after poll, said Trump is being too soft on Russia and he is favoring Russia in these negotiations over Ukraine. I don't think that sat well with the American people. Again, we've got a very loud minority online, and of course you'll see it in the comments section here as well. But poll after poll after poll shows that the American people, by and large, stand much more behind Ukraine than Russia. So I don't think Zelensky's far off base when he says, hey, that stuff, looking at the sentiment of the American people, it carries weight. It's entirely possible that is one of the major things that shifted President Trump's statements here in recent days. Now, you can't talk about the blow up in the White House without bringing up Vice President Vance and that exchange with Zelensky. He did have a laugh here. He was asked about, what are some of the big things you learned other than wearing a suit to the White House, which he had a good laugh. That's in the full interview. But he does talk about Vice President Vance. He says, look, we're not best of friends, but I would love for him to come to Ukraine. He's not my enemy. And I think he has some really important messaging here. Let's give that a quick listen.
Vice President J.D. Vance, is he your biggest enemy in this administration?
No, he's not my best friend, but he's not an enemy.
And
he can be a good friend of Ukraine.
How
has to come and to Ukraine
because I think you invited him several times.
I invited.
So why is he not coming?
I don't know. This question to him, maybe he will be on this place and answer on this question. But I think it's chemistry. You have to come to Ukraine, love Ukraine or not. It depends on your, it's on your point of view, on your feelings, and etc. And I think that he has come to Ukraine and he will love Ukraine.
Again, this is media, and I think a lot of people in media are looking for those quick sound bites and to rile people up and get it to go viral. And what better way than to get the Ukrainian president to say something nasty about Vice President Vance and say he's my enemy or something like that. So I get it where Ravid is coming from with this. Again, a little frustrated. I feel like maybe what are we trying to do there, right? Just stoke tension for the sake of stoking tension. But either way, and I should say, by the way, big fan of Ravid. I think he does a lot of really, really, really solid reporting. I'm getting pretty nitpicky with some of these questions here. But either way, I think Zelensky did a great job kind of navigating that and bringing it back to the big picture. The big picture here is Ukraine at war with Russia and how the United States is going to play a role or not in that situation going forward. To that end, apparently, the United States, we talked about this in a recent video, there's talks about U.S. security guarantees for Ukraine. And in the past, that's been under the idea of, we'll cooperate economically, or maybe we'll have U.S. factories and companies in Ukraine, and that is a de facto security guarantee. And it's not, I get what the president is saying, but that's not the same as Article 5 in NATO, not by a long shot, right? But the way that the conversations have been playing out in recent days, it sounded more and more like they were talking about an actual security guarantee from the United States. Zelensky confirms that in this interview. Here's what he had to say about that.
In your meeting yesterday with President Trump, did you discuss with him the issue of security guarantees,
yes.
U.S. security guarantees?
Yes, I said we need bilateral security guarantees. Of course, the part like backstop for our coalition buildings, this is a great idea. But this is to strengthen and to give more support for Europeans, especially for them who some of them who are balancing and thinking to give troops or not to give boots on the ground or just intelligence, etc. So backstop of the United States will give them
Confidence.
Confidence, yeah. But we, in any case, I said to President, we need bilateral security guarantees. Ukraine, United States, bilateral security guarantees, legally binding. So this is important.
And you
us.
feel that a security guarantee from Donald Trump is something you can trust?
Yes, because he is the President of the United States, and security guarantees from the United States between us work in the world.
All right, pretty interested in hearing more about that. Bilateral security guarantees with the United States. That's serious. That's not something that has been floated very often. In fact, really since it's never really been in the cards, I guess is the best way to put it. There's been a lot of talk about NATO, a lot of talk about a coalition doing that. And we've heard a lot recently about the coalition of the willing. Certainly since President Trump came into office, a U.S. bilateral, so United States and Ukraine, having some sort of security agreement just did not seem like it was in the cards at all. So the fact that that's a conversation, let alone Zelensky here believing, no, that's actually probably going to happen, is pretty significant. So we'll wait for more details to come on that one. Now, the last piece here, they did get into some Ukrainian domestic issues, specifically talking about elections. Zelensky says, yes, we want to have elections. We are going to have elections. And then he is asked, as soon as, martial law is lifted, and he mentioned that a ceasefire would set the groundwork for them to be able to start putting into place mechanisms to have a free and fair election. He was then asked, would you step out of office after the war? And his answer, as we've seen time and time and time again, is pretty consistent. Here we go.
And do you see yourself, after the war is over, staying as Ukraine's president also in peacetime? Or are you going to say, I served my country at its most difficult moment in history, and now I'm stepping down?
If we will finish war with Russians, yes, I'm ready not to go, because it's not my goal, elections. I wanted very much in a very difficult period of time, be with my country, help my country. Yes, that's it, what I wanted always. So this is not my dream, just to have elections. My goal is to finish the war.
Yes.
So again, overall, really solid interview. I think we got a lot of things out of this that we haven't heard before, and definitely very timely given how we've seen some changing tones following Trump's statements at the UN General Assembly and then with President Zelensky afterwards. President Trump saying he thinks that NATO should shoot down Russian aircraft that penetrate NATO airspace. What? I mean, it even caught Zelensky off guard. And then a Truth Social post, which it's just a post, it's not words, I got it, but talking about how Ukraine can win this war. And we're starting to see more people within the administration kind of circle the wagons around that idea. The support for Ukraine, pushing back on Russia, finally starting to use a bit of the stick against Russia because the carrot has not been working. As, let's see, I think it was Secretary Bessent maybe that said that yesterday, or Mike Waltz, the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Either way, that term was actually used. We're starting to pressure Russia, and now, through Zelensky, we're hearing that there were pretty positive conversations between President Trump, and the leadership of the United States and Ukraine here in recent days. Again, those are all words. Now we wait for actions. But the big action, right, we got to find out what that weapon system is that could end the war without even being used. I'm excited to read the comments to see what you guys have to say about that. But again, if interested and able, the link to the fundraiser is in the description below. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.